The phone buzzed in Catherine's pocket, pulling her out of the rhythm of her work. Standing outside a makeshift clinic in a rural village, she squinted into the midday sun and wiped the sweat from her brow before checking the screen. The name on the caller ID made her stomach twist. Richard. For a moment she considered letting it go to voicemail. Calls from her stepfather rarely brought good news, but against her better judgment she answered. "Hello," she said, keeping her voice neutral. "Catherine." Richard's tone was unnervingly cheerful. "Just thought you'd want to know I sold the mountain cabin." Her heart stopped. "You did what?" she demanded, gripping the phone tighter. "Sold it," he repeated casually, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Cleared some of my debts. You'll thank me later." Catherine's voice trembled with rage. "You had no right. That cabin isn't yours to sell, Richard." "Relax," he drawled, unfazed by her anger. "You're never around to enjoy it anyway. Someone might as well put it to good use. Besides, I've been managing things while you're off saving the world. It was an easy way to fix my problems." The smugness in his voice made her blood boil. She hung up abruptly, not trusting herself to continue the conversation. Her mind raced, replaying his words over and over. The cabin wasn't just a building to her, it was her sanctuary, a place filled with memories of her late mother, and moments of peace she had worked hard to protect. Richard had no idea what it meant to her, nor did he care. Taking a deep breath, Catherine tapped on Laura's name in her contacts. Laura, her best friend and co-owner of the cabin, answered on the second ring. "Hey, Kathy, what's up?" Laura's cheerful tone was a stark contrast to the storm brewing in Catherine's chest. "Richard sold the cabin," Catherine blurted, her voice shaking with frustration. There was a pause. "He what?" Laura finally said, disbelief evident. "Apparently, he needed the money for his gambling debts," Catherine explained bitterly. "He thinks he can do whatever he wants, but our co-ownership agreement makes that impossible, right?" "He didn't have your consent." "Absolutely not," Laura confirmed. "That sale is invalid. We'll figure this out, Kathy. I'll pull up the documents and start reviewing them. You finish your work there and come back as soon as you can." "We'll handle it together," Catherine exhaled, a small sense of relief washing over her. Richard thought he could take advantage of her absence, but he underestimated her resolve. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. As she hung up the phone, a calm determination settled in. Richard's schemes had gone unchecked for far too long, but this time she had allies, resources, and a firm grip on the law. The cabin was more than just a piece of property. It was her lifeline, her history, and a part of her soul. And she wasn't about to let it go without a fight. Catherine sat on the edge of her cot that evening, staring at the phone in her hand. Memories of the cabin flooded her mind. The summers she spent chasing fireflies, the quiet evenings by the fireplace, and the hours restoring it alongside Laura. The cabin wasn't just a home, it was a piece of her history, and Richard had no right to take it away. Laura called back the next morning. "I've reviewed the co-ownership agreement," she said. "You're absolutely right. Richard couldn't have sold the cabin without my consent. The sale is invalid." Catherine felt a rush of relief, but it was short-lived. "Do we know who he tried to sell it to?" "Not yet," Laura replied, "but I've pulled the county records. There's no official transfer of ownership, so it looks like he tried to do this under the table. Typical Richard." "We need to act fast," Catherine said firmly. "Can you start gathering all the legal paperwork? I'll finish my assignment here and come back as soon as I can." "You got it," Laura replied. "We'll handle this together." The next few days passed in a blur as Catherine wrapped up her volunteer work. Though her hands were busy, her mind remained fixed on the betrayal. Richard's audacity knew no bounds, but this time he'd gone too far. Catherine wasn't the scared teenager he used to intimidate. She was an adult, now with allies and a clear path to justice. Back home, Catherine wasted no time. As soon as she unpacked, she met Laura at her apartment. Together they pored over the co-ownership agreement, emails, and any correspondence they had about the cabin. "He's been planning this for a while," Laura said, pointing to a text Richard had sent weeks ago. hinting at financial trouble. He probably thought you wouldn't notice until it was too late. Catherine's jaw clenched. Well, he's about to learn how wrong he is, Laura nodded. I'll contact a lawyer to help draft a cease and desist letter. If Richard tries to involve the buyer again, we'll have a legal paper trail ready. The buy. Determination in Laura's voice gave Catherine strength. Together they began building a case, documenting everything, the co-ownership agreement, Richard's messages, and even the names of potential witnesses. A week later, Catherine stood on the porch of the cabin. The once familiar haven felt different now, tinged with the weight of Richard's betrayal. Inside, the air was thick with tension as Catherine waited. When Richard finally arrived, he wore his usual smug expression. "Catherine," he said, stepping inside without invitation, "I'm glad you're here. Let's talk about this cabin situation like adults." "There's nothing to talk about," Catherine replied, her voice steady. "The sale was illegal. Laura and I co-own this property, and you had no authority to sell it." Richard's smugness faltered. "That's ridiculous. The buyer paid in cash. It's a done deal." "No, it's not," Catherine countered. "Without Laura's signature, the sale is void. You know that as well as I do." Richard's face darkened. "You think you're so clever, don't you? Always playing the perfect daughter." "This isn't about me," Catherine said, stepping closer. "This is about your choices. You stole from me, and now you're facing the consequences." The confrontation ended with Richard storming out, muttering threats under his breath. But Catherine felt a newfound sense of strength. For years, Richard had pushed her around, but not anymore. This was just the beginning of her fight, to reclaim what was rightfully hers. Determined to take the fight to the next level, Catherine and Laura doubled down on their efforts. Laura contacted a trusted lawyer who specialized in property disputes. Together they gathered all the necessary documents, including the co-ownership agreement, county records, and screenshots of Richard's messages. Their goal was to create an airtight case. "Richard won't have a leg to stand on once this is done," the lawyer assured them during a video call. Meanwhile, Catherine tracked down the real estate agent involved in the attempted sale. The agent, clearly uncomfortable, admitted that Richard had misrepresented the ownership of the cabin. "I had no idea there was another owner," the agent said, apologetic. "If I'd known, I wouldn't have touched the deal." Catherine nodded, jotting down notes. "We'll need your cooperation in confirming the details," she said. The agent agreed, providing documentation that further solidified their case. As the legal pressure mounted, Richard's desperation became evident. He began leaving angry voicemails, accusing Catherine of ruining his life and threatening to escalate the situation. "You don't know what you're doing, Catherine," one message said. "You think you can win, but you're just making this harder for everyone." Despite the harassment, Catherine stood firm. "He's trying to intimidate us," she told Laura, "but we're not backing down." The lawyer filed a formal cease and desist letter warning Richard of the legal consequences if he continued to interfere. The letter was clear and unyielding, and it marked a turning point in their battle. A few weeks later, the buyer contacted Catherine directly. "I didn't realize the sale was illegitimate," they explained. "I'm willing to back out if that helps avoid further complications." Relieved, Catherine thanked them. The buyer's cooperation was a major win, and it validated all the hard work she and Laura had put in. The lawyer updated them soon after. "The fraudulent sale is officially void," he announced. "The cabin is still legally yours." With the fraudulent sale voided, the legal case against Richard escalated. Catherine's lawyer filed an official report, and the authorities opened an investigation into Richard's actions. Detective Miller, a local officer assigned to the case, reached out to Catherine. "We've reviewed the evidence," he said. "This is a clear case of fraudulent misrepresentation. Richard will need to appear in court." Catherine felt a wave of satisfaction. She had spent weeks building her case, and now it was paying off. Meanwhile, Richard's attempts to manipulate the situation grew desperate. He called Catherine again, this time pleading for leniency. "You can't do this to me, Catherine," he said. "We're family." Catherine's voice was steady. "You made your choices, Richard. Now you'll face the consequences." The investigation concluded with Richard being charged with fraud. For the first time in years, Catherine felt a sense of closure. The cabin was safe, and the legal battles were finally behind her. She and Laura returned to the cabin together, spending a weekend restoring it to its former glory. As they worked, Catherine reflected on how far she had come. The cabin wasn't just a property, it was a symbol of her strength and resilience. That evening, they sat on the porch, watching the sunset. "To never letting anyone take what matters." "From us again," Laura said, raising a glass. "To us," Catherine replied, smiling. Weeks turned into months, and Catherine settled into a new rhythm of life. The cabin became a place of healing and growth, a refuge where she could reflect on all she had overcome. Together, she and Laura made plans to share the space with friends and family, ensuring it remained a symbol of resilience and connection. One afternoon, Catherine received a letter from her lawyer. The court had ruled in her favor, solidifying her ownership of the cabin and penalizing Richard for his fraudulent actions. It was the final closure she needed. Sitting on the porch that evening, Catherine opened her journal and began writing. The cabin, once a battleground for greed and betrayal, now stood as a testament to her strength and determination. It wasn't just a place, it was a part of her story, a reminder that she could weather any storm. Laura joined her with 2 cups of tea, handing one over with a smile. "Here's to new beginnings," she said. "To new beginnings," Catherine echoed, raising her cup. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Catherine felt a profound sense of peace. The future was hers to shape, and she knew she had the strength to face whatever came next.